Is Kamar Usman the welterweight GOAT? In fact, don't answer that. Don't answer that. Let's redo this. I want to ask it a different way, but I do want an answer to this. This is not rhetorical. I want you to give me an answer. I'd love if you went down and left me a comment so I can actually see the answer. But to yourself, play along with this experiment. I'm not asking you a question. I am making a statement to you. Kamar Usman is the welterweight GOAT. Kamar Usman is the greatest welterweight of all time in the sport of mixed martial arts. Now, do you deny that? And I have to use that word specifically because largely in this sport, we will argue back and forth, but once Dana White says it, so it is. I mean, largely, once we hear Dana say it, and in most situations like this, he just never does, but if he does, right, it's no different than when we're sitting around predicting who the number one contender is or who's going to fight or what date they're going to fight at. Like, we argue and we go back and forth and we talk about what should be, and then Dana gives an announcement and that's it. We don't have to talk about that anymore. It's settled, right? Well, Dana said today that you cannot deny it. You cannot deny that Kamar Usman is the welterweight GOAT. Do what you want with that. It wasn't the bigger point. Listen to what Dana says next. I loved this. I love this, and I'm afraid you guys missed it. I don't want you to miss it. Dana said, complimenting Kamar, he said he went through a who's who. He went through everybody. We gave him everybody. And then Dana was talking about himself and his organization of the UFC, and he said that's what they always do. Talking about the UFC, he said, we always give you the hardest fights. We push you and we push you and we push you. This is a quote. I loved it because I've at times wondered if he knew that. At times I have wondered, does he understand the schedule and the competition? Does he acknowledge it? Does he appreciate it? I have wondered that. I mean, it's like anything in life when you just start doing it over and over again, you take it for granted, it's just the way it is. The new normal, they call that, and off you go. And I have wondered that. And Dana even made the comparison to boxing. Of course, we were all thinking it in our head, but he actually said it. He said, well, this is what boxing does. They try to get a guy to 57-0 with 57 knockouts, make a whole bunch of money in one night. That's not what we do. We put the best against the best, and that is what they do. That was the promise from day one. And they have been hard and fast on that policy, and they have not looked away. But when you do that, your time as a fighter, that window that you always hear about, it's smaller. You generally get through it a little quicker. You generally have less memories. But the ones that you have are really great. And I have wondered, does the UFC know? Does Dana know? Do the people in charge know? Do they understand? Because Kamar Usman most definitely went through a who's who. And he could have retired. And had he retired, I think that the argument of GOAT status would be easier. I think it'd be easier for him. Now, he may have it anyway. According to the boss, he does. I just don't think Kamar's done. I'm not even sure that he's going to continue at 170, right? I mean, there was things that George St-Pierre did that were going to be almost impossible to duplicate. But Kamar Usman went up to 185 pounds. One of the judges said he won a fight that would have made him a number one contender to draw into a guy who was the current champion who he'd already beaten. I mean, could you imagine, though? That could be a riddle for some of you new fans, but for you hardcore fans, you know exactly what I just said. Could you imagine if Kamar Usman went to 185 pounds and became the world champion? And then you're going to try to argue against him for GOAT status. I mean, you start to run out of things. You start to run out of things that George did that Kamar did not do. George got put in a very unique situation, and it's just the way that it played out. It wasn't the strategic plan, but George beat all the guys of yesteryear. That's what Matt Hughes represented. The guys that came the generation before George, he beat them. Then he beat all the guys of his time. That's what's lapping the division and taking on Josh Koscheck successfully 2 different times. That's what that represents. But because he was able to beat Johnny Hendricks, who came along after George retired, picked up the belt, and had his own time, now George has just beaten guys from 3 different eras. And it's a really hard argument to get around. It's just food for thought. I think these conversations are very fun. I thought it was very sweet that Dana said this. But I thought it was just as sweet to see that he understands why those guys don't stay champion for 10 years, why they don't have those 50 fights. And he understands that he is the one that pushes them. It was a cool spot. It was a cool interview. And I feel like it really meant something to Kamaru.